have all of these existing networks all around the world where you have hosts that have created local host groups and are helping each other. Short-term rentals is very collaborative, and people are doing this organically without any real benefit to them. I think if you add token benefits and like token economies on top, now you're actually being able to like quantify the value that you're bringing to that network through things like creating these local host groups, running meetups, educating people, onboarding people. And I think that creates a really, really sticky ecosystem.
Cynthia, I'm just curious, like from a quick research or glance over like the DTravel site and like what you guys do, it seems like there's a couple benefits to a few different groups of stakeholders or people that are involved in the kind of travel ecosystem. So I'm curious from your perspective, like what is DTravel and how does it help people travel more cheaply, save on fees? And even on the other side, how does it help property owners, potentially make more money for renting their properties out?
So at a high level, DTravel is a peer-to-peer vacation rental ecosystem, and we connect hosts and guests directly. And within this ecosystem, we have 3 main products. We'll be adding more, but right now the 3 main ones are DTravel Direct, DTravel Search, and then the Nite Protocol. DTravel Direct is basically our host product, and this enables them to be able to create their own peer-to-peer direct booking site or listing. DTravel Search is our guest product, so this allows anyone to find peer-to-peer listings within our network. And then finally, the Nite Protocol is sort of our decentralized open source data layer, which DTravel products are built upon. And this allows anyone to basically standardize vacation rental data and be able to read and write data so they can use that data to build apps and dApps, because that data otherwise is siloed within lots of different platforms like Airbnb, Booking.com, and other software providers. And in terms of the cost savings, because we are more of an infrastructure layer rather than a centralized platform intermediary like Airbnb and Booking.com. This basically allows us to cut out a lot of the expenses that these platforms have to pay for, like lobbying, customer service, large teams, marketing, etc. And then these cost savings get passed on to hosts and guests. And so to give you an example, centralized platforms generally charge anywhere from 20 to 30% across the board. And this is split between hosts and guests, or some platforms will charge it all on the host side. But generally, it's anywhere from 20 to 30% that gets marked up. And we only charge 3% in total across both guests and hosts, and really just on the host side. So you can see how much of a huge cost savings that is.
Makes sense. Just to reiterate, you think about it like there's the data layer that like backs the ecosystem, the marketplace, and the search as the 3 sort of like pillars of what embodies DTravel.
The data protocol, the host product, and then the search.
Makes sense. One thing I wanted to ask about is maybe like to get back to the beginning, Cynthia. Like I know you have one of the coolest founder stories of just like having deeply like lived and breathed the space that you're solving for many, many years. And I think have a really unique mind for both, the business, why these businesses are broken, and also like how that flows all the way down into like the host experience and actually like the full stack problem that is facing these marketplaces today. And so like the vectors that decentralization makes it better. Curious if you could just tell us a bit more about like your path and how you got to eventually building out DTravel.
Yeah, what I will say about crypto or Web3 is that everybody that you meet has such a cool story. Like nobody has a straight path. Everybody kind of came to Web3 in some random form. And if you ask them more about their journey, like they've done all these really interesting things that didn't seem like they were connected at all, but then somehow ended up in Web3. And I think that speaks a lot to how early the space is, where people come to it because of the ethos and what it represents in this like grand vision of world building, rather than like trying to come just because it's a job. And so everybody's driven by passion. But there's this Steve Jobs quote that I absolutely love. He says it in the Stanford commencement speech in 2005. And the gist of it is basically, you can't connect the dots looking forward. You can only connect them backwards. And so when you look at your life, all these things that seem random at the time end up making sense. And it's when you follow your intuition that those things connect and seem like there's a reason why it happened the way it did. And I think that's very much my story. Like I started my career in insurance and thought I was going to build my career there, but then ended up moving to San Francisco in the heyday of 2014, which is when the Valley was like at its best. And just being surrounded by all these entrepreneurs and big dreamers who would casually just say, oh yeah, like I'm building $1 billion business, like it's no big deal. I think you just by being there by osmosis really take on that belief that it's possible for basically anybody. And so I went from believing that founders and entrepreneurs and startups were only for people who were really talented or really well connected to thinking that it was something that I could do as well. And then when I went back to Vancouver, what ended up happening was my husband and I decided to rent out one of the rooms in our house because we had tried out Airbnb, thought it was really cool, and just wanted the experience, fell completely in love with it. And even though people thought we were super weird, they're like, well, what if that person is a murderer or something? We just really liked it. And we saw the opportunity at the time of being able to take space that was underutilized or not utilized at all and being able to monetize on that. And we basically wanted to meet other people who had a similar mindset. So we would attend regular host meetups in Vancouver. And we're so excited to meet other people who also saw the same opportunity because it felt like we were this like really niche kind of weirdo group at the time, right? Like outsiders or something. And it was really exciting to meet other people who had that same mindset because it just felt really rare. And we wanted to continue to build out that kind of community. So we co-founded a forum just for Airbnb hosts. And that kind of grew very, very quickly and became the largest forum. I think it was just perfect timing because Airbnb was still very new, even though they had presence in both North America, US and Canada, but they were still looking to expand within Europe, for example. And there weren't really a lot of resources. So the timing was perfect where people were looking to meet other hosts and it just kind of blew up. And that just felt like this random passion project that we had for many, many years. And something else that happened kind of right after this was Ethereum launched on mainnet, and my husband's an engineer. So he decided to build like this Frankenstein rig in our house. And one rig quickly turned into 10 rigs. And like we couldn't even use a lot of appliances in our house because it would trip. But that basically started us on our journey to our rabbit hole into crypto. And we decided to launch this game that was helping people learn about trading crypto. And I think these two things that felt like completely separate and random, like, you know, becoming an Airbnb host and building this community and then like going down this path of crypto felt like they would never converge. But then we ended up having to close down the project, Altcoin Fantasy, unfortunately, because Google Play banned us from the app. But then what ended up happening, I think luckily, was I met with a bunch of other people who were in the crypto space and who were really interested in travel. And we decided to start working on this idea of what would eventually become DTravel. And so there were all these like random circumstances that felt really random, but really have worked together to bring us to where I am now, where all the experiences I've learned around like building community, all my experiences around, you know, the short-term rental space, and then of course like Web3 have all converged into the perfect storm to be solving the problems that I faced personally as a host over the years.
Yeah, I think it makes sense to just follow your intuition. Like you don't really know going forward. Like you said, you can't connect the dots going forward, but there's a reason that you're, you know, potentially more inclined or more interested in one thing versus another. Like the whole, I guess like air host gig economy or forum like community that you all built reminds me a lot of like my first days in crypto, where it was just this crazy fascination with something, and it was very much a hobby on the side, and it became like, you know, a full-time career, and it sounds like it did for you too. So that's really, really cool. Talking about DePIN and the DePIN sector, I think we've seen a few different ways to segment it now that there are more startups building in more kind of real world verticals across different sectors like energy, compute, you know, wireless, short-term travel. So there was an interesting tweet from Hasib, who's a partner at Dragonfly, I think last weekend. And he was basically saying that the less P, like the less physical a DePIN is, the better in his mind, because then it, you know, more closely resembles software, right? There's better margins. You can scale faster. I and many others in the DePIN space felt the kind of exact opposite. I mean, I think it's a trade-off. I mean, there's pros and cons to both. I think that the more, you know, physical your DePIN is, the more of a moat you have. Like, I think you can't it's very hard to fork hardware, whereas it's easier to fork a software network. But, there's more CapEx and there's more friction in scaling that. But as a result, I think it gives you, a better, bigger moat. So I'm curious from your perspective, I think another way to segment DePIN is like CapEx heavy versus CapEx light, right? Is there a lot of like, hardware that needs to be bought anew and deployed, or is it already out there? And then there's also like this other interesting kind of subsector of DePIN, which I think is where you guys sit, which is kind of like, gig economy platforms or like human labor type DePINs, where it's like, you have the brain trusts of the world that are competing with kind of like job boards. And then you have you all that are kind of competing with like an Airbnb. So I guess just, how do you see yourself, DTravel fitting into the DePIN ecosystem? And then also, what gives you conviction that almost like Web 2 labor marketplaces can be disrupted in the same way as some of these like physical CapEx heavy industries like telecom or compute, for instance?
I'm definitely very excited about I think, transition or maybe evolution of DePIN and how it's defined, because it did start out very much like physical network based. But what we're seeing is there are all these projects that are being classified as DePIN that are much more about the network growth, which to me is really what defines DePIN, is taking tokenomics and applying that on top of viral network growth, because every addition to the network benefits the network. And that stays the same, whether it's a physical network or more of a digital network like what we have. And I think you're spot on when you say that there's trade-offs. Like with CapEx, there's obviously huge opportunities because it hasn't really been done before. And so you have access to all of these operators or nodes or physical infrastructure that can come into these new networks. And it's a net new opportunity. It's like completely greenfield. But then the problem with that is you're going from 0 to 1. And 0 to 1 is very challenging because you have to educate people. You have to get them on board. You have to build the infrastructure, the operations, all of these things to compete with a lot of incumbents who have a lot of money, versus with digital marketplaces, more like what we have, there's already existing infrastructure and awareness and adoption for it. But I think where the beauty and the opportunity comes in is adding the tokenization piece, which is really what defines DePIN. So, with short-term rentals, for example, there's already a lot of marketplaces that exist. Like none of this is new. You don't have to convince a host to come on board to monetize their property. You don't have to convince a guest to use it because they can save money. But what I think really has been a lost opportunity for a lot of these platforms, and we're starting to see this now, is that they become very transactional. I think when Airbnb started, they were not the first to create like the short-term rental industry, right? It existed for a long time before. But what they did was they digitized it, made it really easy to come and find a lot all at once and to have a lot of diverse inventory. But how it started, which was the idea that you would have like a very unique, personalized local experience, has really shifted to be more like of a commoditized experience. And so whether you use Airbnb or Booking.com or VRBO, you as a guest don't really care as long as you get the cheapest prices. And I think that's actually like a real loss, because what really drove me in the beginning and why I was like a big Airbnb fan, I drank the Kool-Aid, like my dream job was to work at Airbnb because I just love the community so much, was this idea of like really being community focused. And they did a really good job, but we've shifted really far away from that. And I think that's what tokenization and a community focus can really add back in, because you have all of these existing networks all around the world where you have hosts that have created local host groups and are helping each other. Like I'm in a bunch of these groups and people will say, hey, I have a guest and they want to extend their stay, but I don't have room. Does somebody else want to take them? And so you have this really beautiful collaboration, which is very interesting because normally you would think of it as like a competitive environment, but actually short-term rentals is very collaborative and people are doing this organically without any real benefit to them. But I think if you add token benefits and like token economies on top, now you're actually being able to like quantify the value that you're bringing to that network through things like creating these local host groups, running meetups, educating people, onboarding people. And I think that creates a really, really sticky ecosystem that makes people want to stay and then aligns everybody much more closely. So to me, it's like short-term rentals V1 was sort of the Airbnb era. which I think we have to give a lot of credit to. But short-term rentals V2 is much more of this community-focused ecosystem where everybody is contributing value and then is able to actually gain that value and be able to know like what value they're driving, which will create a sticky product. So I think that's really the big opportunity that we have, and why token economy specifically are what's going to kind of evolve where we are today.
So can you tell us more about like in practice what that means for the travel token? Or I guess let me put it this way: there may be a counterfactual world where like you run like Airbnb but on stable coins, and you solve, maybe you can cut out some of the payment processing costs. Maybe there's less chargebacks, and there's some benefits to integrating with wallets, and it's just a better product experience. But you lose, or it's you don't get any like of this phenomenon of like tokenizing value within the host communities that you were just talking about. How do you go about like protocolizing that into something that people can interact with on chain and is more like programmatic than just these like off platform organic communities that spin up?
Mm-hmm. So there's a couple of ways. Like when we think about tokenization with the TRVL token specifically, it has 3 functions: discounts if you're using TRVL within the ecosystem, staking, and then governance. And so this is really the method where we're trying to, like with staking, for example, if you stake TRVL, you're going to be able to earn give backs by being able to contribute monetarily to the ecosystem. If you're using TRVL within the ecosystem, or you are becoming a host or booking something, then you'll get rewards back. And so that's how we can automate or like tokenize the reward distribution automatically. And then the government's piece is really about people having a say. So I think one of the challenges with some of these centralized platforms is that when you have a large group of very diverse people and you as a platform is trying to make decisions, somebody's always going to be unhappy. And a prime example of this was during COVID. On the one hand, you have hosts, and then on the other hand, you have guests. And Airbnb was put in a very difficult position where they said, okay, like this is obviously like a zero-sum game. If hosts benefit, guests are going to lose, and vice versa. And so they made the difficult decision to like pretty much side with guests. And I don't think there's a right or wrong answer here, because I think it was a very difficult challenge. But I think it's a different situation if you went to everybody within your community and said, here's a situation, and it's up to everybody here to decide what we want to do. I think even if half the group was unhappy, at least it felt like you had a say in how those decisions were going to be made. And I think that's really the core difference between like having a centralized platform versus like a decentralized platform where people can drive a lot of that decision making.
Me and Connor were talking before the call about like what parallels sort of we could take from other DePIN projects that we've had over past years to sort of, what you're building. And one of the patterns that we've noticed is that a lot of the like more infrastructure focused DePINs, they've eventually had to sort of like not give up, but relent on like some piece of on some integration point with the broader Web2 or existing ecosystem. So like you might have to use like S3 storage, or you might have to like plug into a mobile core for a telco carrier or something like that. But at the end of the day, it's really hard to like disrupt the network effects around like the actual like protocol levels or protocols that are in Web2. Is there any way for, or do you guys have any plans to sort of use what Airbnb and other Booking.com and other platforms have built? Like they obviously have both the community, but also a bunch of data. How can you piggyback off what they've done to just accelerate what y'all are doing at DTravel?
Yeah, there's two areas that we're really playing in. So with the Nite Protocol, the reason why we are building it is that when we were building out the host product, a lot of the professional hosts use property management software. So this allows them to basically have one hub so that they can manage their accounts across multiple platforms. So if they have an Airbnb, Booking.com, VRBO, Expedia account, they just have one place they go to manage everything. And a lot of these companies or these property management systems, they all connect via API, and they're all permissioned access. And the challenging part is that none of the data that they have is standard. So let's say you have PMS1, PMS2, and PMS3. You are literally like customizing each API connection because the data fields are different with each one. And as you can imagine, this becomes very inefficient, and it's kind of silly because you're storing the same data across all 3 of these platforms. And so it becomes a cost for everybody and it's inefficient. So what we want to do instead is say, is there a way that we can take blockchains and create a data standard so that the way that we're defining a listing or a property or a host is exactly the same across the board? And then secondly, if we can decentralize access to that data so that either you store that data or you read that data and then you just pay for your usage, or you get paid based on whoever is accessing it, then that makes the entire industry much, much more efficient. And I think opens the door to innovation, because if you have all of these siloed data access that you need to get permission for, then it really discourages new people from coming in, and it becomes really expensive for them to build. So that's what we're trying to build long-term with the Nite Protocol. And then the second piece, and we've talked about this, Al, but I'm really excited by some of the stuff that's happening with like ZKTLS, because one challenge, and this is something we're trying to do with the Nite Protocol too, is when you're moving from one platform to another, you lose all of your history. So if I started on Airbnb and I want to move to booking.com, I can't take any of my reviews with me. I can't take any of my listing data. I can't take any of my booking data. I basically have to start from scratch. And that makes it really challenging to move, but it also makes it really challenging for an operator to operate their business. And if they get kicked off a platform, to start all over again. So what ZKTLS is allowing, I think, like any company to do, is take existing infrastructure, like let's say Airbnb, have somebody sign into their account, be able to export all the data, and then store that in some way, whether it's an NFT or some other place. And it could be stored in like a Web2 server or like a decentralized server. But the key aspect is that now that user owns their own data and they can choose what they want to do with it and who they can share with it. So piggybacking off of that, what we see is we want like hosts and guests to be able to export their data, put it on the Nite Protocol, and then choose who they want to share that with. And then what we'll do is that if they're onboarding to DTravel, now they can bring all their reviews, all their listing history, and it becomes like a 1-minute process for them to be able to do that. So it's really exciting, I think, where we are, because finally the Web3 infrastructure is coming to a place where a lot of these tools are becoming actually very, very practical instead of just like theoretical, which is, I think, what we've had for the last few years.
Yeah, the ZKTLS stuff I'm very excited about as well. Just I'm excited to see like what kind of crazy, almost like vampire attacks go on. That's just like part of the fun of working in crypto, right? It's just a lot of innovation going on at the edge. Talking about
Nosh has actually done something like this. If you want to, I'm sure you probably already know, but they are a kind of like a DoorDash, like a Web3 DoorDash. And they've done this where they've had drivers just like log into their accounts, or restaurants log into their accounts, and then just be able to connect that to Nosh.
Yeah, so you can port over like reputation and kind of past data, everything that's in your account. Yeah, that's cool. Yeah. I feel like it's slept on. I mean, I know Sal thinks it's slept on, but I'm slowly getting up to speed on ZKTLS and specifically opacity, and it seems really, really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just talking about DTravel again, what is what's on the horizon for you guys over the next 6 to 12 months? Like any exciting product launches you're looking forward to, or any like DePIN partnerships that you want to highlight? We'd love to hear.
Yeah, we actually did a partnership with Silencio. So they're a noise tracking app, and they have a marketplace created. So we were plugged into their marketplace, so any of their community members can discover DTravel. And then if any DePIN projects are out there, we're always open to collaboration. So definitely reach out. We have 2 big announcements that are coming up. I can't really share too many details, but I think our community members will be very excited. One of them is definitely going to expose us to a huge, huge network of users all around the world. So pretty excited to share that once we've been talking about it.
Super cool. And are you guys going to Singapore? Anyone from your team?
No, unfortunately not. Are you guys going to be there?
I don't think Sal will be, but I will be. Mahesh will be. A couple other folks, but I'm sure we'll run into you at a conference soon. Yeah. Last question we had written down here was just talking about the token launch back in November of 21. I think we all remember that as kind of like the peak of last cycle. Remember it fondly and with a lot of pain, I think. But what was it like to launch a token in those conditions, and then also kind of have to obviously build through a bear market that followed? And any maybe advice you'd have to DePIN founders about token launches, about market conditions? We'd love to hear that as well.
Yeah, so this is my second bear market that I've built through, and I like to joke that I just like to make it hard on myself. But something that might sound counterintuitive is no founder wants to build through a bear market, but I think any serious, long-lasting founder needs to have that experience. Because what happens in a bull market is things are super crazy, and there's a saying that like even a stopped watch or clock is right 2 times a day. And in a bull market, everybody looks like a genius, right? And it seems like you're making the right decisions. It seems like you're getting all of these false signals, but it's all just noise. Whereas in a bull or in a bear market, like you can be doing everything right. Like the metrics are going up the right way. You're doing all the partnerships, like you're getting all this recognition, and the market doesn't respond. But I think that's actually good, because then you need to develop the resilience as a founder to just put your head down and keep building, and also have that very, very long-term vision and dedication to what you're building, and know that it's right. Because I think when there's no noise and nobody is saying like, oh, great job, you guys are, killing it, then you really, really have to stick true to your vision and know that what you're building is something that you truly believe in. So that when there is a bull market that comes around, like you have both the resilience to get through whatever, but you also know that you're not going to be spending a ton of money because you lived through the pain of having to survive a bear market. So I think that bear markets are actually, as painful as they are, really necessary, and they really separate the good projects from the bad, because the ones who build through the bear market and survive and are in the best position to take advantage of all the newfound like attention on crypto are the ones who end up doing really well. And sometimes that takes 2 cycles. So, if you look at Solana, for example, in 2018, like I met the team, and it was like, back then it felt like, oh, there's already so many L1s. Why do we need an L1? Now there's even more. But it took, quite a while for them to start to get the attention that they deserved. And like, they've been building all this time. So sometimes it just takes time, but it gives you the practice that you need as a founder.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, anything worth building takes time in any industry, Web 2, Web 3, whatever it is. But then also like with crypto, you don't get the crazy ups without some crazy downs as well. It's just how it goes. Well, Cynthia, is there anything else you want to hit today, you want to cover, or do you want to just let our listeners know where they can find you on social media and on the internet?
Yeah, we launched a community growth incentive program recently. So what this is that we've put aside $150 million in TRVL to reward the community for contributing to our growth. So talking back about that DePIN token incentives, basically anybody who onboards a listing or makes a booking or refers either a host or a guest will get part of the 150 million TRVL. So anybody who is a host or a guest, definitely check us out. And then we have, as I mentioned, like a bunch of really exciting announcements coming up. So definitely tune into our socials, because there's some pretty big ones that I think everybody will be really excited about.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on, telling us about DTravel, and wish you guys the best.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks for listening to the Proof of Coverage podcast. We post new episodes Mondays and Wednesdays, interviewing the best DePIN and crypto founders out there. If you like this episode, follow us on Twitter @CoverageProved and all other platforms, including YouTube and Spotify, @Proof of Coverage Podcast. Thank you.